Just hear me out. It's 1986. Oprah is interviewing sax player Kenneth Gorlick, known around the world as Kenny G.
It's like you are talking to and doing a few other things with this instrument.
Well, I've never taken any music lessons, so I don't really know exactly what I'm doing.
In 1993, he played at Bill Clinton's inauguration. By 1996, he was starring in golf commercials.
My driver used to be my least favorite club in the bag, till I got the Great Big Bertha driver. Now it's my favorite.
And his music was the calming soundtrack of the Weather Channel. Kenny G had hit his peak.
Tell me that part about Kenny G again.
But it wasn't just Kenny G. Smooth jazz, the style of music he'd come to be the face of, was everywhere.
Smooth Jazz, 94.7.
Smooth Jazz, 106.5.
Smooth Jazz, 98.7.
This is Smooth Jazz, 106.9.
How did that happen? Like, where the hell did smooth jazz come from? Let's go back to Clinton's inauguration.
Hey!
Kenny G actually wasn't the only saxophonist performing. In fact, Will Smith,
This feels great.
the MC of one of many inaugural events that day, brought out 10 sax players to serenade the jazz-loving president.
Check this out.
This was like the who's who of saxophonists. But it's this guy, standing right next to Kenny G, where this story begins.
There's no question Kenny G has one idol, and he admits to it, Grover Washington Jr.
In the late 60s and early 70s, straight jazz was all but gone from pop radio. The music was becoming more experimental, and albums like Miles Davis's Bitches Brew established jazz fusion, an eclectic hybrid of jazz and rock, as the next iteration of the art form. But some jazz artists saw promise in pop music and began crossing over by recording instrumental covers of huge pop hits. A shining example of that is jazz guitar virtuoso Wes Montgomery's 1966 cover of Goin' Out of My Head.
I think I'm going out of my head. Yes, I think I'm going out of my head.
That record was produced by Creed Taylor, who filled out Montgomery's mellow guitar with strings and woodwinds, instruments that were more familiar to pop radio listeners. This song sounded more like the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds than it did most jazz records that came out in 1966. And it was a smash hit, because it established a formula for jazz that the everyday listener could understand. As this Billboard article put it, the chasm between jazz and popular music was narrowing. It was through Creed Taylor's label, CTI, that Grover Washington Jr. became a household name.
Grover Washington defined crossover jazz in the 70s.
His fourth album with Taylor was Mr. Magic. Just looking at the cover, you know you're going to listen to songs that are smooth as
It really is, in the most simple sense, an R&B background of a fairly slow tempo with fairly slow harmonic change that's kind of grooving.
On top of that is Grover's saxophone, playing a simple yet infectious melody. The second he made radio-friendly songs, he lost a lot of respect from the jazz world, and it was difficult gaining it back. Here's a quote on the back cover of his own record that reveals this tension. Apparently, a jazz critic went to one of his shows and sat scowling at the bar. By the end of the show, he said, "Cat can play." Just having that jazz critic admit that he could play the saxophone was equivalent to a bushel of 5-star reviews.
Any jazz player will give you a list of things that they don't like about it. They don't like the lack of technical virtuosity. They don't like the lack of harmonic interest. But in my opinion, what trumps it all is popularity. When you're dealing with art clicks, popularity is like poison.
If jazz purists were quick to dismiss Grover's Mr. Magic, then they sure as hell were going to roll their eyes at jazz guitarist George Benson's Breezin' in 1976. It was the first jazz album to ever go platinum. The title track was originally composed by soul record producer Bobby Womack and bears a strikingly close resemblance to Going Out of My Head.
George Benson is one artist that no one could refute because he had the chops from straight-ahead jazz. And people were mad in the straight-ahead jazz industry.
To them, he chose success over art. This Downbeat magazine review of George Benson's says it all. Hearing George Benson on this album is like watching Marlon Brando in a Three Stooges movie. Such is the relationship between the art and the artist. But that didn't really matter to the public. This Masquerade, the single off the record, peaked at number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and won the Grammy in 1977 for Record of the Year.
He does this scat type singing, where he's scatting and he's playing, and the fingers are following his voice. And you couldn't say that wasn't jazz in 1976.
By the end of the 70s, dozens of musicians followed Benson and Grover's breezy sound. Even Taxi, one of the most popular shows to ever be on television, used a Bob James pop jazz recording as their theme song. The problem? Well, radio didn't know what to call it. This reporter just said, not quite jazz, but pretty stuff. Enter Broadcast Architecture, a market research firm tasked with giving this promising radio format a name.
All these radio stations were coming on doing this format. It was like, what do we call it? The way we did focus groups was a little different. We would interview people one person at a time for 30 minutes.
A female radio listener entered the room.
She was saying it's jazz, but it's not really jazz, and it's smooth. And she goes, it's smooth jazz. Yeah, that's what it is. It really struck a light bulb with everybody that was behind the glass, watching.
Okay.
Turn on 94.7.
94.7. 94.7. Let me see. Okay.
On behalf of all of us at Metropolitan Broadcasting, welcome to 94.7 The Wave.
94.7 The Wave.
What you just heard was the moment one of the first official smooth jazz stations went on the air.
Within a few months, KKSF in San Francisco launched, WNUA launched, CD 101.9 in New York launched. It was a tipping point for the format, for sure.
But take a look at how the Wave marketed itself. Only occasionally did they actually play what some would consider jazz music.
We started testing everything from Phil Collins,
She calls out to the man.
even some Hall & Oates tunes, vocal tracks that would help kind of glue it all together.
Smooth sounds for a rough world.
And make no mistake, Kenny G was at the center of all of it.
CD 101.9, it's called Silhouette, and the artist, of course, Kenny G.
Kenny G.
Who likes jazz?
I love jazz. Kenny G can blow the storm up.
Great.
Ladies and gentlemen, Kenny G.
Kenny G was known just as much for his hair as he was for his saxophone playing.
He was the cool white boy. He was just a cool guy who played the saxophone. And I'm going to go ahead and say it's the money. Mm-hmm. He made so much money doing it.
And this year's adult contemporary artist is Kenny G.
I don't know what to say. This is, I would have never expected to win this thing.
Yes, you did, Kenny. This chart shows the rise of smooth jazz radio starting in 1987 when KTWV went on the air and peaked around 1997. The same year, Kenny G entered the Guinness World Records book for holding a note for over 45 minutes. Wait, what? Some of smooth jazz's most attentive fans were the at-work radio listeners of corporate America.
If you take the wave to work with you and there's a fax machine in your office, jot down a few songs that you'd like to hear on the wave and fax them to us.
We would get hundreds and hundreds of faxes. Like within an hour, the fax machine starts rolling.
Smooth jazz seemed like it would dominate forever. But then everything changed. In the early 2000s, Arbitron, a firm that measures audiences, introduced a new technology, the portable people meter. It's this little beeper. People believed it killed smooth jazz. PPM, which is still used today, is an electronic beeper that captures audio tones masking the signal of radio broadcasts. Basically, it picks up audience listenership automatically. It replaced a decades-long practice of using paper diary entries to measure audiences.
People would write down for a week what they listened to, and they would turn it in. Very easy for people to do. It went from that to what we want to ask you to do is wear this on your belt all day, and we want you to do this for a year.
But it often didn't work with smooth jazz. The format's soft ambient sound didn't allow for the signal to be consistently masked in the music without being discernible to listeners. If the signal wasn't embedded, the beeper just couldn't register it. Polling site 538 tracked the number of 6 large market smooth jazz stations before and after PPM. In each instance, they either changed formats or shut down entirely. But it might not have been all PPM's fault.
I think it's a reflection of what our economy did. Our station went off the air when everything crashed.
Smooth jazz radio was music for ordinary, everyday people just trying to get through their day stress-free. It certainly never cared about critics during its solid 20-year run. And unlike straight-ahead jazz, it didn't care so much about challenging the listener either. And it's why from the 1960s to the 90s, anything written about the music looked like this. But dig deep into smooth jazz's history, and you'll find some really exciting music.
There was an album Herbie Hancock did called The New Standard. Oh man, that was good. But I'd come off the air talking about that. I was like, oh, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing.
Or go back even further to Grover Washington Jr.'s Wine Light.
And just listen to it as you're cooking dinner or something. It's just chill, man. And it'll give you a feeling for why people fell in love with this music for such a long time.
Thanks so much for watching my little mini-series on jazz. I hope to tackle so many more stories on this genre of music in future Earworm episodes. Until then, I've got a great gift for you, which is a Spotify playlist full of amazing smooth jazz songs that will definitely make you a convert.